Welcome to Storytelling from Evaluation Data. I'm Alejandra Acuna, Co-Executive Director of Valley Nonprofit Resources. We talked about our questions, concerns, worries, doubts, or fears, and our goals or dreams related to program evaluation. These are the different segments of today's talk. We are jumping straight into understanding program evaluation, which is essentially assessing the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the relevance of what we do, and to really figure out, are we achieving what we're intending to achieve, and are we making a positive difference? Every program has a goal, an objective, and activities. Goals should have impact indicators, objectives should have outcome indicators, and activities will have process indicators. Not only do we log how many activities, how many people, that's process, but we also want to look at what the results are. Did we meet our objectives? And then ultimately, did we make a difference? So we're going to start with identifying goals and desired impact. So what are we striving for? What is the expectation? What is the specific impact? Think about, again, just to have a guiding framework, think about a program or an initiative that you are working on. Off the top of your head, write down, what is the big goal? What is the big difference or the big impact that you're trying to make in that? Just as, so you can have that as a reference as we walk through this, so that we can talk about this stuff. You can tie it back to something that's tangible and concrete, and it's not all abstract. Write it down as a couple of words or a sentence. What are you striving for? What's the big impact you hope to achieve? Process evaluation is providing information about what was done, what were the activities, who was reached, who were the people, the population. It describes your activities and what were the intended and actual activities of the program, and did you learn anything? And here are examples. I mentioned I do a lot of evaluation for nonprofits or school districts, and so here are examples of how I tell the story. This is an example of process evaluation, which is, again, how many did you serve or how much did you provide? So for instance, when I work with a large school district, they want to know how many students did a program serve, how many parents were served, how many groups were run, how many minutes of service. And they usually track it with logs, sign-in sheets, or electronic records, or Excel, or some sort of database. And then we present it because school districts really care about how many students who are receiving free and reduced lunch are served, how many who are in special education, who are English learners, who are foster care. And so if you notice on the left side of the screen, there's a figure of a student, and you see the different colors represent what percentage. So it looks like the majority of the students served were on free or reduced lunch, which is an indicator of poverty. The next is special education, followed by English learners and foster care. So if you're working with a school district, this is what they want to know. So if you're collecting this information, these characteristics on the communities that you serve, that's what school districts want to know. So if you're partnering with school districts and you can tell them this story, we went into X number of classrooms, that's great. We served 100 students, that's great. But if you can tell them, of those 100 students, how many were free or reduced lunch, how many were special ed, they can turn around and tell that story to show the state that we care about these vulnerable, marginalized populations in our schools, and we're providing additional services to them. So you can see how you can present it in narrative form, or you can present it as a visual. Here's another example, and this is just using pie charts and graphs. So I did an evaluation for a middle school and broke it down by gender, race, ethnicity, and grade level. I remember asking some colleague, do you have a preference? Is there a pie chart, graphs, like which one is easier to read? And I had a colleague who was a teacher, and she said to me that we start teaching students graphs in first grade by asking each student in the classroom, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? And so they'll have like a little circle, like how many vanilla, how many chocolate, how many strawberry, and that they start to learn about graphs in first grade. So I don't feel like graphs are so intimidating, but they can be. And so you may want to get a sense of which tell the better story. I'm just curious, with those of us in the room, do you prefer donuts, pies, or graphs? You type it in the chat. We see the diversity, so just know that. So there's not one type of visual that everybody seems to like, but I love what you said, Alfredo, that it depends on the information. Some information is served better by pies versus graphs. So there's no right way. You kind of have to find your niche. We also collect data, and I think this is true of your organizations in your intake forms or in your enrollment forms. You collect so much data about your participants, about the community that you serve. And so some of them make compelling stories. So for instance, here, we're not just telling the story of what grade, what age group, race, ethnicity. We surveyed or we screened students about PTSD symptoms, and we asked 4 questions. This is how it broke out. So I'm just curious, just looking at this one slide. Oh, this is another tip I've read and learned, is you include 1 data point per slide. Here's the result. I'm curious if anybody wants to either type in the chat or unmute themselves. What is the story that you get out of this slide? What jumps out at you? Or what just seems interesting about this to you? So when I look at it, for me, what's the first thing that I jumped out at me was our kiddos are having nightmares. They're having difficulty sleeping. And I feel like parents wouldn't know that unless they asked. And so 1 out of 4 of the 429 students that we asked reported experiencing nightmares. We're talking about describing the population, or who do we serve, how many. I worked with a nonprofit that served young people. I described the grade levels. The students were from grades 6 through 12. The average age was 14, with a range from 11 to 17. 80.9% were Hispanic or Latina. 19.1% were American Indian, Alaska Native. I'm just giving you ideas. Maybe you like word clouds. Maybe you like pie charts. I mean, there's so many different ways to tell the story. Another thing I wanted to point out is this is a nonprofit I worked with. In their intake or in their enrollment packet, they actually asked students and their parents to describe the family strengths. And so often we ask about risk factors, about symptoms, about needs, about problems, about deficits. And so this particular program asked youth, please describe your family strengths. And these are some of the comments that students made. So again, to show that there's different ways that you can describe the community that you work with in terms of demographics, in terms of needs, in terms of strengths. And here's another. I started a program for men of color at Cal State Northridge. When I went to do my end of the year report, I just wanted to show we provided individual mentoring to 10 students. We recruited 21 students in our focus groups. 30 plus students participated in our basketball clinic. 48 students participated in the stress screening online. So again, this is just how many were served. So there's so many different ways that you can tell the story. I just have fun with it. Like, where did I get this idea? I don't know. Creativity. I don't know that it's the best way to tell the story, but I offer them to you as prompts, as ideas telling your stories. These are by no means ideal or the best case. This is just different ways that you can do it. So those were all examples of process data or process evaluation, or how to report process. So now we're going to shift to outcome evaluation. Outcome evaluation, generally speaking, is referring to assessing the immediate effects of a program. So it looks at the desired objectives. Remember, we talked about you have program goals, objectives, and activities. So now we're looking at what are the desired objectives and outcomes. And now we're looking for evidence to collect regarding the extent to which those objectives were achieved. So how well or how much did we achieve those objectives? Outcome evaluation essentially answers the accountability question. Did it work? Did what we do work? Did all the time and effort and workshops and energy and interventions and programs, initiatives, did it work? And instead of counting the number of clients served, that's again process evaluation, we're gonna, our outcome evaluation tracks the actual change in status or condition. So a program is successful if it improves the well-being of the program participants. There's so many reasons to evaluate outcomes. I saw it in people's goals and dreams, where we want to know, like, is what we're doing working? Is there a way for us to improve what we're doing? Like, what do we need to tweak or change or add or modify or expand? So those are like program level reasons. But there's also some macro level reasons, which are pretty powerful. They're that when we share outcome information with stakeholders like policymakers or funders, that can be really compelling. It can really help either to make a case for continued funding. It could make a case for whatever decision-making body. If we need to advocate for a policy change, our outcomes can make a really good case for making macro level changes. So here are some sample evaluation data results. They're just to give you ideas. What we found before and after this 6-month intervention, the youth completed a cultural connectedness scale, and the average score increased from pre to post. And then they also took a resilience survey, and from pre to post, not only was there an increase in the average score, the increase or the change was statistically significant. So that's an example of changes in participant outcomes. And I try to express that using graphs, so visual. So you see the before is the red and the blue is the after. But I also try to tell it in terms of a narrative. So participants reported an increase in cultural connectedness and resilience from pre to post, or from beginning to end of the program. So I'm curious, which of those makes more sense? Does the narrative make more sense? Does the graphs make more sense? Which one do you think is more compelling in telling the story? Or both, having them both side by side, the combination. So another example is this. This is outcome, but this is a little bit different. This survey asked students at the end of the curriculum to mark how true they felt about the following statements. And so 94, almost 95% felt that it was true that they learned how to set personal goals. So here's another way to show outcomes. This is not a pre and post. It's almost like a retroactive or a post-test only, giving you different options. There's more than one way to do this. So which makes more sense for your program? And if you don't really have time to do a pre and a post, does a post test only make sense for what you're doing? Here's another example. This is also outcome. We asked students either to tell us or to write what they liked best about the curriculum. This feedback represents 3 students. So what's cool about this is I've noticed that some people are moved by stories like this. Some people are moved by data. And if you don't know who's in the audience, I include both. So I would include this graph and these quotes in the report. Okay, so here's another way. This is a graphically visual kind of interesting way. This was a nonprofit that surveyed youth participants at the end of the 6-month program, and they asked, what are you planning to do with what you learned? 60% said, I'm going to talk to my family about what I've learned. And then you see the little people to represent, 6 out of 10 people. I'm going to talk to my friends about what I've learned. So there's just different ways for you to visualize or present the information. And here's a testimonial from the same program. So this is a testimonial from a participant. Then this is a testimonial from a parent. I'm going to move on to collecting and analyzing data. You all have enrollment, registration, or intake forms. You all probably collect some sort of survey. You can also do interviews or observations. What data do you already have in hand that you could play with or examine to tell a story? Oh, this is really cool. Data visualization and storytelling. So once you've collected the data and you've analyzed it, there's some really cool ways to visualize or create infographic. I work with the large school district, and the evaluation director decided to send out the content that we were working on to Fiverr. And for $40, they gave her 3 different infographic options to choose from. And those are the ones that are on the screen. Anyway, I just wanted to share that as a resource. I'll talk more about Fiverr at the end when I talk about resources. And I did a little bit of investigation, and I found that it's actually a safe and easy place to find freelance workers for almost any service. And there are, obviously, just as in anything, there might be some unreliable or unqualified sellers, but there are reviews that you can read to make sure that you're working with somebody who's reliable. And then Fiverr says, please don't make any payments outside of the Fiverr platform. So if somebody says, pay me on Zelle, like that might be a red flag. Just to give you an idea, Fiverr can do logo design, digital marketing, website development, data entry, and so forth. I thought, what a great resource. And I know that when you're trying to do some of these things, you may be either short-staffed or your staff aren't skilled in this. I certainly couldn't put together an infographic as beautiful as that, but knowing that I could consult with Fiverr to take my evaluation content and make it accessible like this, I thought, what a cool thing. I got to share that. This is so exciting. Trini is here, so she can say more about this, but I was on the board of Tia Chuchas, and they had their 20th anniversary a couple years ago, and they created this documentary. So I want to show you how you can tell the story using a documentary.
The community that made Tia Chuchas what it is today, an art space, a cultural hub, a home to connect with our ancestors. You have been sharing your words at weekly open mic nights and dancing with us at our annual Celebrating Words Festival. You've created a space that has raised young leaders inspired to insist on dignity and respect for everyone. And during a pandemic that's disproportionately impacted communities of color, you've shown the whole city how to honor the sacred in all of us.
Because of you, Tia Chuchas has been able to continue to provide creative medicine during these distressing times. We've moved our classes and bookstore sales online, where we've been able to provide resources for demand in anti-racist literature. We've spread our services to juvenile camps, adult prisons, and reentry homes, and are helping change the narrative around mass incarceration. And because of all this work, Tia Chuchas has received the honor of being named one of 2020's California Nonprofits of the Year.
As Tia Chuchas approaches our 20th anniversary, we've decided we're ready to relocate to a new space, one that is 2.5 times the size of our current one. What does that mean? More books, more programming, more possibilities to transform communities in the Northeast San Fernando Valley and beyond.
So what does it take to make this a reality? The same thing it has always taken. You, your passion, your support, your contributions. Of course, we realize that many are hurting financially. But if you can make an end of year donation or can become a monthly Greenmakers donor, your generosity is more needed now than ever. And if you can't donate right now, we appreciate you letting others know that they can pledge their support at tiachucha.org/donate. Tia Chuchas is always here for you, and it will always be here. Thanks to you.
Trini, do you want to say a few words about how you were able to create that? Because that was, talk about the partnership. Did that cost Tia Chuchas a lot of money, or was it relationship currency?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It was relationship currency, and it really is photos and just videotaping almost everything we do ends up being really useful to convey what you can't always say in words.
One way that you could tell a story in the coming year, be more intentional about taking pictures and videotaping. So I wanted to say that we've talked about the importance of data, but data alone is not enough. We need to know how to tell the story. And I went to a workshop once where there was a TV writer who talked about how nonprofits have access to the most compelling stories, but when we put it on a PowerPoint, it could not be more boring. We just take the most amazing experiences, but we don't know how to tell the story. I have here an NYU graduate, and I'm going to ask her, this is Paulina Acuna Gonzalez, and I'm going to ask her to talk about the important elements of storytelling. So what's important when you go to take your results and tell the story, what are the important elements?
Okay, thank you for having me. I'm glad that you took my advice to have experts at your presentation. The core things when drafting a story is I like to present it with somebody wanted blank, but blank, so blank. As in, there's somebody with a definable goal, and there is something that's in the way of them getting that goal. And the whole story is them basically coming up with solutions to overcoming the obstacles getting in the way of their goal. For a compelling story, it doesn't necessarily mean that a character always gets their goal, but it just means that there's a change over time through the growth of figuring out problems and utilizing specific tools in order to overcome specific problems. The hero's journey defines it as a call to adventure for the character, a character deciding, and then going on a journey presented with multiple small obstacles along the way, and that could culminate in a big realization for the character, something that changes the core of who they were. It makes them not the same person that they were when they began the journey. And it's an important tool so that their end of the story makes them in a far different place than they were when they started.
I love it. Thank you.
You're welcome. I paid way too much money to learn that.
I paid. No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
I'm curious if she can either type it in the chat or repeat what she's.
What I wanted to say when she said somebody, that somebody could be your nonprofit, that somebody could be your program, or that somebody could be a client that you're working with. I was thinking like when you create case studies, you can tell we worked with this individual, this family, this youth. This is the presenting problem, or this is what they came with. These are some of the things that we tried. Because I think to show like, it's not like one and done. It's not like most people have one problem, they have multiple problems. And it's not like we provide one intervention. We often provide multiple interventions. One word, una palabra that describes or reflects your feelings, thoughts, or reflections after our time together. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you. And for me, this is not a one and done. And so if you are interested, please let me know. And we can have a part 2, a part 3. We can really make it a series. There are a couple more resources that I wasn't able to share with you due to time, but let's have a part 2. Okay, so thank you so much for your participation, for your engagement, for your questions. I would love to do a part 2. So maybe we'll do part 2 in October because we already have the September workshop planned. Have a beautiful August, and I'll talk to you soon. Happy Wednesday.